Let's fill this atmosphere with warmth and love.
We thought of ourselves as one big family that did handle our own discipline. I was in a lot of the meetings where people were spanked or beaten, and I was slapped once also in a public meeting.
People were brought up front and had to tell who they'd slept with and who they'd sneaked off to a restaurant with.
It wasn't a week that went by that I wasn't called up on the floor because of my behavior, because of my attitude. Stanley Clayton, up front center.
He would ask people, what do you think we ought to do with them? You think I ought to get a good boxing? And then you'd get a resounding roar, yes.
You might fight 5 people in one night. Well, you know, you're very tired. I've seen situations where they actually knocked the person out and actually took water and threw the water back on, woke him up and woke him some more.
I had welts really bad, and when I went to work the next day, one of my employees noticed the welts when I sat down, and I just broke down and told her. She didn't even know I was People's Temple. And she called the manager of the station up, and they talked to me about leaving. I couldn't say goodbye to my son and my husband, because at that point it was like the Gestapo. The families were turning in each other. If I had said goodbye, one of them would have reported me.
It's kind of like when you get married and you have this ideal and you're in love, and then, the honeymoon wears off and reality sets in. And most people, once the going gets rough, don't jump out immediately.
In one planning commission meeting, Jim was getting notes, kind of love notes from one of the members on the planning commission.
Jones is sitting there calmly, and so another lady said, well, I don't know why you keep doing that. What makes you think you got something that he wants anyway? And so another woman says, well, you know what, you ought to just take off your clothes and show him what you got. You ain't got nothing. And so by this time, they look back to Jones, and so he looks over his glasses, and he nods with approval. Yeah, that's a good idea.
She was to be totally naked, and she was down to nothing but her skin. Not even any shoes on, no bra, no panties, no nothing.
Then they begin to say what her breasts looked like, her stomach, butt, vagina, you name it. Everything they could think of, they were saying. By this time, her face is red. Her body's almost red from embarrassment. And I noticed something. Jones was sitting, looking over his sunglasses, but he had a smile on his face, like he's really enjoying this woman being torn down.
I have a conscious memory of sitting there thinking to myself, this is wrong. And I didn't do a damn thing to stand up and say, this is wrong.
It's like a child in a dysfunctional family. On a certain level, it's normal, I just kind of took everything in stride.
But then we felt like we had gotten involved and gotten in so deep that it was actually no way out.
I traveled on bus 7, which was Jim's bus. And he sat down next to me. And I was sitting there and I thought, that's weird. It smells like alcohol next to me. And he leaned over and he said, do you know what you do to me? He had informed me that I was to come in, and on bus 7 there was a room in the back, which was like for just him. He had books, he had a desk, he had a bed. When everyone got off the bus at the rest stop, I went into his little room and I sat there and waited for him. And finally, he opened the door. He just pulled down his pants and had sex with me. And as I lay there, frightened, not sure what to do, and as I shivered, he'd say to me, this is for you. I'm doing this for you, Debbie.
Senator Moscone, how are you? Very good to see you too. Hi. Well, in 1975, there was a mayoral election in San Francisco, a conservative candidate and a liberal candidate, George Moscone. Jones had several hundred people who would go door to door election day. Instead of a group that might give you 20 or 30 of these people, or 100, you had 300 or 400.
God bless you for being here, and let's go on and win.
The Moscone election was very close. The margin of victory was probably no more than 4,000. So you had to credit a big chunk of decisive votes to People's Temple.
The reward for the election of George Moscone was the appointment of Jim Jones as chairman of the City Housing Authority.
What was once a really boring meeting all of a sudden became like really interesting when Jim Jones became the head of it, because we all came down on the buses and we were instructed that when Jim came in, we stood, and when he left or spoke, we'd stand and clap.
The sheer staginess, the controlled atmosphere that sort of enclosed this guy made him so unusual, so different than the norm, that it made me very curious. My biggest problem was getting somebody to sort of talk to me about the church in kind of conversational terms.
I had become friends with some of the various defectors, and one of the defectors told me that she was going to speak publicly about Jones. And I said to her, I said, well, if you're going to speak publicly, I'm going to speak with you. I'm not going to let you do this alone.
I finally heard from some ex-members who heard I was interested in writing a story about the temple for a New West magazine. And they took a chance. They called me, and some of them said, you know, you don't know nothing about the church. Wait till I tell you what I went through.
Before the article was going to break, Jim convinced the publisher that she needed to read it to him. He was on one phone and I was on taping the other end of it while somebody else listened on another one. Jim didn't understand that there was no way he could talk her down from whatever this article was going to say. And as she continues to read this article, he's looking around the room at about 5 of us, and you could tell that he's becoming more and more anxious, and his mouth becomes drier and drier. And he realizes that this article is going to be hugely damning. And it was midway through it, he mouths to all of us in the room, "We're leaving tonight." They flew out to Guyana 6 hours before that article was going to hit.
When Jim Jones decided that there was too much pressure, too much trouble to stay in San Francisco, he ordered the move to Jonestown, and it happened almost overnight. People were being taken to airports. There were people who were packing their belongings and leaving their homes with virtually no explanation to their family members as to where they were going or why they were going. Fred Lewis came home and found that his wife had taken their 7 children and gone to Guyana, along with all their possessions.
My wife had gone over 3 months prior. I was waiting on pins and needles, and I was talking to her probably twice a week on the ham radio. And Leona Collier came up and said, "Okay, Eugene, it's your time. You're going over." Coming into Jonestown, we see a guard at the front gate, and you're all excited, and you're going down this road. The trailer comes to a stop, and then you can see the wooden pathway that leads to the pavilion, and you want to run. But you just try, I'm gonna be cool. And just as you reach the edge of the pavilion, people started rushing you that you knew, my wife is there. I haven't seen my mother in over a year or so. And I'm just hugging people, and it's like I've arrived, and everything's gonna be okay now.
I've never been so totally happy or fulfilled.